are going to hop into our next lesson. And so I wanted to do another one of our traditional lessons because it's been a while, and I'm pretty sure you're amoeba sistered out at this point. So we're going to talk about ecological succession. And so when you hear that term, you're probably thinking, what in the world is that, Ms. Pedalis? And so here we are. So ecological succession, what this means is pretty much it's the process of an ecological change in an ecosystem where one community is replaced by another community over time. And so that's the key thing to think about here is this is not happening overnight. It's not happening in a week. It is over a long period of time. And there are two types of succession that we are going to keep in mind today. The first one is primary succession, which is the formation of a brand new ecosystem. Okay. Secondary succession, think of it, something that's coming in second, is recovery of an old ecosystem. Okay, and so we're going to talk about the differences of these two here now. So the first one we're going to look at is primary. So primary is usually first. And it's going to occur when a community forms in an area that has not been previously occupied. And so what we mean by that is there are no organisms to start off this ecosystem. Okay, so these are usually areas that are being developed over exposed rock, lava. So after the lava has cooled off from a volcano erupting, melted ice, eroded sand, areas of that nature. And so again, this is going to happen over a long period of time. So keyword here is long. Okay. The only way we are going to get any kind of ecosystem is by having what we call pioneer species. Okay, so our pioneer species are going to be the first organisms to grow in that new environment. And so for a primary succession, these examples of pioneer species are lichens, mosses, things of that nature. And so we have them here on the side, and it's kind of like the algae looking stuff that grows on rock. And so that's what's going to get us started. Now, these organisms cannot grow in areas where others cannot. And because they can grow in these areas of barren rock, that's what helps start the ecosystems. Okay, so over time, these organisms are going to decompose. And so like we've talked about before with the flow of energy and the food webs and things like that, once they decompose, they're releasing nutrients. And those nutrients are going to form that layer of soil. And so we know that soil is a key factor to be able to build more complex plants. Okay, once there's enough soil in the area to generate enough nutrients, we start getting small plants and we start getting flowers, ferns, and shrubs, all of which can begin to grow in this area. So now once you start getting this vegetation, as you see in the picture, it's going to attract organisms. Okay, so herbivores and omnivores. And then once you have those organisms, it's going to attract carnivores over time. All right, so these plants can then further break down the rock. It's going to allow more soil to be formed and retained. And so now we're getting layers and layers of soil. We can start seeing the development of bigger, more complex plants such as trees. Okay, so again, it's going to take a long time for this to take place. So as new species of plant move in, we start now to see new animal species being able to come in and inhabit this area as well. So as organisms growing in each of these stages may even hinder their own survival, but pave the way for future organisms. Okay, so even though they start getting to their carrying capacities, that is okay. Other organisms are going to help maintain those levels. Okay, so eventually, primary succession over a long period of time will finally reach what we call a mature community. And so what that means is we get a climax community, which is a mature and stable community of plants and animals. Meaning, it has reached the end of succession. These plants are staying stable. The animals that are inhabiting this area are stable. And so, that's it. There's no more to the succession. Okay? Secondary succession is when we have an area that was previously occupied by living organisms. Okay? So think of like the wildfires that happened in California or the fires that were happening in Australia. Okay? The community is disturbed by some sort of disturbance. Okay, it could be a fire, it can be hurricanes, it can be human impact, us farming way too much. Okay, what's happening here is we're causing a secondary succession. So there was already an ecosystem there, but we are going to successfully create a new ecosystem on top of that pre-existing one. All right, so an established community is destroyed, but the soil is still intact, and so that's the key thing. So in primary, remember there was no soil. So secondary, there is soil, so secondary soil. And because the soil is there and it's intact, it's going to take less time than primary succession in order to meet that climax community. So we do have pioneer species for secondary still, but our pioneer species in this case are not going to be the lichens and mosses growing on barren rock. It is going to be weeds and grasses because we still have soil there for them to grow with. The process typically is going to begin with these grasses and weeds that are able to grow quickly, and then eventually at some point we are going to reach again that climax community. So a couple of things I want you to think about is where in succession would you expect to find organisms and stages that last for short periods of time and those that would last for long periods of time. So take a moment and think about that. So short periods of time would generally be at the beginning, okay? So the lichens and mosses growing, or the weeds and the grasses growing. Those are going to be short periods of time. Think about it. If it rains outside, we know how quickly those weeds can grow. Whereas we're going to have longer periods of time with organisms and plants trying to grow. Think of trees. Trees don't grow overnight. It takes years and years for them to develop. Another question to think about is why might secondary succession tend to occur more quickly than primary? Okay, so you may have said because you don't have to make soil from scratch. Okay, so remember in primary, there is no soil. We get the soil from the leeches and mosses that are decomposing to be able to create that soil and those nutrients. Whereas secondary, we already have the soil. And the final question I want you to think about is what kinds of organisms would you expect to find in an area where disturbances are frequent or intense? Okay, so again, this would be those pioneer species like lichens, mosses, short grasses. Okay, so if we have a whole bunch of disturbances, so there's generally wildfires always happening in California. So there's going to already be that soil there. But in cases that the disturbances are intense, so think of a volcano erupting. So now we have that barren rock, you would get those lichens and those mosses growing in those areas. So here's a side-by-side comparison of primary succession and secondary succession, and I'm not going to read it all. I wanted to leave this up here for you to be able to, pause and have as a recap. You can even screenshot this portion to be able to help you with your assignment. But a couple of things that I just wanted to point out and just re-emphasize is remember primary succession is no soil. We are building a brand new ecosystem from scratch. Whereas secondary succession is recovering previously existing ecosystem after a disturbance. Okay, so that's the hurricanes or the fires and things like that. So we still have soil that's intact. And one key thing, again, is those pioneer species. We have mosses and lichens that are going to be in my primary succession because they're the ones that are going to make the soil. And then in secondary succession, it's grasses and weeds because there's already soil there. And another key thing that I want you to look at is the end result. They're both going to end in a mature and stable climax community. So it doesn't matter if you start with primary succession for that ecosystem or secondary succession. They're both ultimately going to lead to that climax community. Okay, so hopefully this video finds you in good spirits and you're enjoying your time at home with your family. And I know I am, but I will say I do miss our traditional classroom time together and things like that, and hope that we can definitely get back to that as soon as possible. There is a link to quizzes in Google Classroom for you to be able to practice your knowledge with, and so we'll just kind of keep rolling with the punches, and as soon as I find out more information, I will let you know. Okay, so love y'all, miss y'all. Hopefully y'all enjoyed.